Okay, we are recording. All right. So, I posted that I was going to start streaming tonight to talk about something that I've learned over the last year with regards to cube design. And I'm going to be hopefully doing a couple of these over the next month and a half. These are lessons, insights, things that I've taken to heart in conversations I've had with several members of the, online Cube community-ish Discord groups, just people I've met, fellow Cube designers, creative people, people that work in games, people that don't. And I thought it'd be a good idea initially to write some Substack pieces about my findings or my current position on things as I've come to understand game design in 2024. However, I don't think that writing is the best medium for this kind of stuff. I'm not going to say people don't read, because people obviously do read every day. They read articles, they read Twitter, they read books and stuff, obviously. It's not like people don't read, but people will consume this, I think, a little bit better. Also, I have an easier time formulating thoughts while talking. So hopefully this will come across well. I was also inspired to do this by, in particular, by Matt Grenier, who's been a source of tremendous insight, inspiration, camaraderie over the last year. So he, in particular, has inspired me to step out of my comfort zone a little bit and share, once again, with you all. So, hello. So, I wanted to start with something a bit more technical and a bit more analytical, because it's an easier thing to grok and talk about. However, we will be getting into some more, philosophical points as we go through this. While that's true, I think the conversation is gonna be pretty grounded. I think we're gonna see how it goes. Title's called On Card Evaluation. So we're gonna be talking about card evaluation today. The subtitle is Maximalism and Networks in Cube Design. So this has to do in particular with the notions of maximalism and how it pertains to card evaluation, as well as networks, which is a word that you could also call them matrices, but I like network. It's a little more what's the word? It's a fiber optic, and I enjoy that word a little bit more. Yeah, this should work, I think. Good. Okay, so just in case you've been living under a rock, the cube rock, for the last 10 years, let's just touch briefly on what is card evaluation, why is it important, and why do people in the cube space talk about it so much, and why is it such a point of contention? So card evaluation is quite literally how we evaluate any given card within the context of its environment. This could be within a booster draft environment, within its relevant 60 card format, like constructed format, Commander, and Cube, obviously. So, most notably, it's important to stress that card evaluation is, in at least what I'd like to say about it, is it is important to know that to know where it's coming from. I like to think of it as a tool. That is why I called this a very technical discussion. And more specifically, when we talk about cube card evaluation, we're talking about a tool that we can use at our disposal once we define what our goals are for building our cube and the intended experience we want to give to the people that we're cubing with. So it's something that helps us get to where we need to go. And it is often very different between different cube designers. This is, of course, why there's a point of contention about card evaluation, or so many points of contention. And similarly to the question of cube design as it pertains to game design, what is fun? You could argue in a zoomed-in sense with cube that card evaluation is part of that, answering that question. It is a reflection of the games that we want to create, or the game, in this instance, the cube that we wish to build, or curate, or whatever you want to call it. Why is this important? Well, from being a tool, as with any other tool for constructing a sculpture or a computer, it's important for understanding your voice as a cube designer. And because as we try to decide what kinds of cubes we want to make for people, our understanding of card evaluation is a direct output of that journey. So it's not the end-all be-all of understanding magic, but it is an important aspect of understanding the game's mathematical structure and language, and also understanding how that's relevant to what we're building. Why is card evaluation a point of contention in the cube space? This is, as I've gone through years and years of being on Discord, I'm just going to adjust my volume a little bit down. Yeah. As I've spent years on Discord communities talking about cards and cubes and how those things relate to each other, often there's a understanding of dialogue between people that's very rarely met. I have a very dear friend, Zachary Barish, who loves this concept of people or things being in dialogue with each other, or not being in dialogue with each other. And I think that card evaluation is part of that problem that we experience when we communicate ourselves and our ideas within a greater system of people sharing ideas. So it's hard to talk about card evaluation without talking about your unique game that you're designing, and that can create tension between people or strain ideas and strain communication. And so dialogue is a big part of this puzzle. You see this result in people saying, when someone asks a question about their cube, "It depends," either in quotations or as a meme. This is because first of all, it does depend. It's all relative, but it's such a constant response that it's become kind of like a joke in the cube space. So it's complicated. What did I just do? I hit spacebar and my audio went up. Okay. So, what I'd like to go over during this is some basic ideas about card evaluation that I have, and use those ideas to conduct an exercise over a card, to evaluate a card. So let's talk about two of the most fundamental forms of card valuation, which is rate and synergy. These are two sides of a coin for many people. These are concepts that are, some people believe they're fundamentally diametrically opposed to each other. I disagree. I think I would assert that rate and synergy are a lot closer in their language than they've ever been in 2024. And I even have a comment on this page. So just in case, rate concerns itself with the practical senses mana value of a spell, or more specifically the cost, the input, and then the output that you get for that cost. Almost all constructed formats are very, very concerned with rate. And synergy is how a card exists in relationship to the cards around it. I like to define it as synergy being something that, like, how a card can interact with the other cards in the deck. I guess how well. So a couple comments here, because I don't want to go over like fundamental stuff for too long. The base rate of a card, so its efficiency, its mana value, its input-output ratio, is really important. And I can't stress enough how important it is to understand rate fundamentally when talking about Magic cards. The difference between 1 and 2 mana, 2 and 3 mana. These are things that we could spend hours talking about. But suffice to say, rate is important to understand, but the math of a card doesn't tell the entire story of a card. As if, to put it another way, rate does not define Magic, but rate is a very important thing to understand in how you look at Magic cards. But the math of the game is not the overriding force to card evaluation. It is a great balancing knob for keeping yourself grounded when looking at cards. I've talked about this briefly over the past year, and specifically with regards to Cube being primarily addressed as a limited format or a draft format, that using rate to look at a card that's, a 2 mana 1/1, for instance, versus a 2 mana 2/2, and that being a factor in understanding how relevant your creature is going to be in a game or across a lot of games of Magic. So it's a good tool for to remind yourself, hey, cards kind of have to be good on rate, creatures especially, in 2024. Now obviously, we're talking about cubes that are using cards from 2024 and the last 5 years to really have that statement hold up. I'm looking at people that design formats that are about like vintage modern, vintage legacy formats, things that can skew based on what was available then. But I like to look at rate as a way to skew in favor of when I'm looking at creatures against each other. I hope that's clear. It's a little muddy, but I hope it was clear enough. So the floor is very vital to look at, which, again, has to do with rate. For a card's playability or its relevance in your game. However, the ceiling of a card, or the dream, shout out to David McDarby, is something that is more inspiring to people in general. And, okay, let me turn it up. How's this? Is this better? I'm hitting red a little bit, but if it sounds better, let me know. I could also just get closer to the mic too. I'm a little far away from it. Is that... Can you guys hear me? Could be. Well, we'll just keep going. Thought the audio was fine. Okay. Maybe it's just Ryan. Come on, Ryan. Get it together. It's louder. Okay. I'm just going to adjust it back to this. Turn your mic up. Turn your headphones up, Ryan. Okay, so the floor is really important to understand, but the aspirational aspect of a card, which you could point to synergy for that, but my point is, everyone loves to talk about the floor. Everyone loves to talk about what the fundamental numbers that you're getting out of a card are, and it's really important. But the other side of it, I would argue, is underexplored by many people in the cube space. And I'm going to go over this a little bit later, but as a little sneak peek, I think it is our responsibility as people that create games out of Magic cards for our friends that we provide something that's sticky and replayable to our drafters, and not just because we're present as friends, but that the game itself has a stickiness to it. And part of that, like reaching for that and touching that, is the ceiling of our, fundamental game pieces. I would argue that it is just as important as understanding the floor. And then looking forward a little bit, I pay a lot of attention to new Magic. I pay a lot of attention to cards that come out. I pay a lot of attention to what WotC is printing, especially in standard sets, as a language for how the future of Magic looks, and what new spaces are being explored, and what we are asked to prioritize, what we're asked to put a microscope to. With Modern Horizons 3 on the horizon, it's important to remember that Horizon sets often look backward and find a lot of designs from our past that we can harken back to and create a unique and sometimes powerful output for old mechanics, a combination of old mechanics. A lot of it has to do with remixing the past and re-releasing it in a way that's relevant for today and pushed enough to play in Eternal formats. However, I like to look at Standard more for what the future brings us and I would argue that it's more important to look at Standard releases for the future. And when I look at Standard releases, I believe that, and I've observed, that rate and synergy are starting to have much more intertwining relationship building than ever before. For anyone who's ever argued that they're diametrically opposed to each other, or that they are in competition with each other, I would present an alternative opinion, which is that they are now becoming necessary to engage with simultaneously, and we're not just concerning ourselves with one or the other. You can see this in standard decks like the Temur Lands deck or the Slogurk deck as great examples of what that means. So, what I'd like to insist here with card evaluation is that we ask better questions. We want to ask better questions because we want better answers so that we can identify what it is that we're interested in with Magic and why we want to make the games that we make to share with each other. There is a very large contingency of people in the cube space that are obsessed with evaluating new cards by asking the question, is this good enough for my cube? Is this good enough for this cube? Is it powerful enough for for the Magic Online Vintage Cube? And that language, I'm going to suggest, is not only useless but counterproductive. It has a singular purpose, in my opinion, which is if you have an existing model that desperately needs something, then like new cards, evaluating them to try to fit into your existing ideas is asking the question, is it good enough for this, has value. But I don't think in a general sense it's a healthy thing to ask. I think that engaging with cards from a power level perspective and good enough perspective are the wrong questions to ask, because they set you up to stick to the same mental frameworks and perspectives that you've held onto and possibly even calcified over however many years you've been designing been designing cubes for. Matt Grenier presented the problem very succinctly by saying people are often asking whether or not a card is good enough, and they're not asking what can I do with this card. The way I phrase it is, ask not whether a card is powerful, as what you can do with it. These are both obviously verbatim. I'm not quoting him. However, this is a fundamental point that I think is worthy of being a better question for us as a group of designers. The more you look at cards within the idea of within your existing mental framework, within your existing cubes, the less likely you will be over time to identify a new design space that will either motivate or inspire you, or bend your understanding of Magic, or even allow these new ideas to exist in the first place within your understanding of Magic. The more that you insist the cards have to be good or bad or good enough, the more likely you are to never change your mind. And that's really important. What can I do with this card as a question is an open-ended perspective on card evaluation, and it leads you to a place where you build relationships between the cards that you know and the new cards that are in front of you. And the relationship that grows between cards, some people call this emergent design. That's fine. You can say that. It's very similar. But it's the important aspect is that you're looking at these things with an open mind. So going back to my title screen and my subtitle, I use the word maximalism and network. Let's just go over those real quick. I promise you we're getting to the point where I'm going to evaluate a card. So just, I know I tend to talk a lot, so just bear with me. Maximalism is, for me, an effort to maximize a card's use cases or a card's utility. It is a ideal by default. It is not something that you can very easily put a period on. Like, I've done the maximalism, let's move on. you can get to a point where you're satisfied, but there's really not a point at which it is finished. So it is it is kind of an endless exercise, because cards can always be given additional utility, be given additional potential. So maximalism is a framework to look at cards. Networks, again, I said another word for this is matrix, but a network is a way to explore the potential relationships between cards as part of a larger system. What does this mean? Understanding that every card, again, ideally, can exist in relationship to any other card in your cube. It's a really good exercise I've spoken about a couple times before, where you can just take a couple of cards and put them together that might seemingly look unrelated and find a way to create a connection between these two cards. It could be something like, what is it? I think the example that was given to me once was Slagstorm and Restoration Angel. Slagstorm is a 3-mana deal 3 to all creatures or all players, and Restoration Angel is a 4-mana 3/4 flyer. There is a relationship that exists between there. There's a different relationship that exists between Mana Vault and Palantir Vorthanc, right? What I'm suggesting here is there's a way that you can identify a relationship between almost every single card in your cube. And the more that you allow yourself to find those connections, the more you're looking at your cube as a functioning system. Yeah. Matt has also suggested doing it with a sample pack. I think you could do it with a pack. I think you can just do it with 2, 3, and 4 cards. A pack might be too much information, but you can start small. You can just put 2 cards together, identify the relationship, and move on. You can then you can add an additional card and find a relationship between the 3 of them. So what I'm suggesting here is that card evaluation in cube can be this complex system of potential energy. So a potential energetic system of this network that you can go from the beginning of the cube to the end of the cube and find a relationship between everything. It's this idea of the whole, right? And that there's this approach, and then there's what I think many would consider a more traditional approach, which is cube as packages of archetypes. I think Matt in his recent video called it deck sorting, as opposed to deck building. It's a good distinction. I think that I've drafted limited formats that have been like that. Modern Horizons 1 comes to mind, where it feels like you're sorting decks among 8 players as opposed to building decks. Almost like handing the cards out, right? Not that this is something undesirable to players, but there's I would suggest there's a lot left on the table for the experience that you're providing for people if everything can neatly fall into place every time you're drafted. Your cube is drafted. So we have, hope I'm setting the stage here a little bit. So, with all that in mind, let's, in a very bright screen, and I'm sorry about that, let's talk about the card that we're going to talk about today, which is sorting the 10 archetypes model, I assume, which is building. So deck sorting was a suggestion by Matt where he spoke about cubes that have such predetermined archetypes, often like with like signposts, gold cards, that things that just point very directionally towards the same decks. So that when you're drafting, you're merely looking for the cards which are supposed to be sorted into your archetype, as opposed to looking at the cards as whatever their potential could be for the deck you're trying to build. So it is both a approach that you can take as a designer, and it's also an approach you can embrace as a drafter. Now, that approach as a drafter could be in conflict with the designer's goals, but yeah, there you have it. Let's talk about the card that we're gonna go over today. So, there's a reason I picked this card. It's White of the Reliquary. We're talking about not Knight of the Reliquary, and I hope that the size of the two cards kind of explains that. When this card was spoiled, it was a couple weeks ago. I was in a Discord, and there was a lot of discussion over whether the card was powerful, whether the card was good, whether the card was just a whatever, just a Tarmogoyf, whether or not it was worthy of being in a Golgari gold slot or whatever. All these questions. And not one person suggested a way to use the card. Everyone just wanted to find a way to fit it into an existing cube that they had. And no one could really come up with any sort of tangible direction to take this card. So I made a suggestion, and we're going to bring that up next, but I made a slight suggestion as to what to do with it, and it was latched onto pretty quickly, and then that was it. And I thought to myself, we could talk about that. We could talk about this card first, one, because it's new, two, because it offers something unique for a Golgari card, and we can keep all this stuff that I have in mind that I've been talking about for half an hour, and we can use this as an exercise to evaluate this card in the ways that I'm suggesting. So, real quick, what is this card? Green, black, 2/2, Vigilance. Gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can tap and sacrifice another creature to search your library for any land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, and shuffle your library. Notably, it's also a zombie knight for its types. This is obviously, in the very Modern Horizons sense, a riff on Knight of the Reliquary, but updated to 2024 standards for something that could potentially see modern play, let's say. Obviously, I think this is a fantastic card, and I'm going to go through why. So let's see what we can do here, and see if we enjoy this process. So, what did I say when I saw everybody talking about it? I said, well, works pretty fucking good with Bloodghast, doesn't it? And, again, yes, it does. You have a Bloodghast, you have a White of the Reliquary on the battlefield, you sacrifice the Bloodghast to White's ability, you search for any land comes into play, you trigger landfall, the Bloodghast comes back. Boom! You have an engine with 2 cards at very low cost. One of them you pay mana for, one of them you probably don't pay mana for. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Bloodghast, some people argue, isn't even a magic card, or isn't even a creature. It's just a set of stats that moves around different zones. So, I propose this as an engine. Great. That's, to me, pretty like obvious, pretty level 1 stuff. Like, this works together. This is an engine. But does it stop there? No. My question, or my proposal to you is, where does this lead you to? It's not just about, hey, I found the card that it works well with. Other cases, sure, we can find some other stuff, but this is the reason why I will play Bloodghast now, or whatever. Throwing a retreat to Coral Helm, we got a stew going. Oh yeah. I didn't even think about retreat to Coral Helm. That is very cool. So, yeah. Where can we go? Bloodghast, great. So let's do some where can we go with this? Okay, so we have the Bloodghast answer. So let's connect some dots here. You can see my cursor, right? Yes. White of the Reliquary sacks Bloodghast, gets a land, but comes back into play. Well, Satoru is a card that really loves it when creatures come into play without being cast. So there's an engine between these two, and the relationship between these two. Now we've created a relationship between Satoru and White of the Reliquary. Now that we have Satoru and Bloodghast, we can look at Grief. Grief is another way to trigger Satoru. So now now Grief fills the graveyard for our White of the Reliquary. So now we're starting to build a little bit of a relationship between these four cards. Now, notably, I'd also like to touch on the rate thing as we go through this. Rate is playing a very important role in all of these cards as well. Now, you can hear me talk about how cards are synergistic with each other, but look at the actual base rate of all these cards. This is a 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance. This is a 2-mana 2/3 Menace. This very easily can get above 2/2. This is we all know what Grief does. If you don't, it's fantastic. Bloodghast is 2-mana 2/1. These are not cards that can't attack and block. These are not like decent to good sized limited creatures, like in terms of attacking and blocking and playing a game of Magic. So I'm not suggesting with any of these, at least I think so, cards that are below rate from a base game perspective. When I say base game, I mean we're playing creatures and engaging in combat, and that your output for your mana spent is worth it. So, continuing on, maybe we have Stitcher Supplier to be able to put Bloodghast in the graveyard. We can sack Stitcher Supplier to fill it even more. Maybe we have Lurrus connecting with White. Lurrus can replay White out of the graveyard. It can replay Stitcher Supplier. It can fill up and make the White of the Reliquary bigger. This combos with Satoru. Do you see how all of this stuff just works? Like you can find a synergistic relationship between all these cards. So we have this, okay? This now, notably, this also points towards something that I'll talk about later with regards to powerful. I'll get to it in a minute. So what if we took the Bloodghast idea and pushed it in a different direction? What if we took Bloodghast and we had Vran, Executioner, Thane on the battlefield? Now we're draining for 2 every time. Again, it's a 2-mana 2/2. What if we had Tormod into play and every time we sacrificed and returned Bloodghast, we got a zombie? What if we used Entomb to put Bloodghast in the battlefield, and we were able to use these cards to get Hogak out? All of this kind of maps towards the same conclusion. Tormod helps out with get Hogak out, triggers off Hogak, Stitcher Supplier mills, Vran pops off every time you're using White of the Reliquary. We're able to tutor these cards in the graveyard. We have this kind of graveyard stuff going on in a different way. What if we used the landfall trigger aspect of White of the Reliquary? So we're able to tutor up certain lands, either utility lands or combo lands, and then we're able to take advantage of that. What if we're able to tutor up at Urborg, and then we have Dread Presence in the battlefield? So every time we trigger it, we're able to either draw a card or deal 2 damage to something. What if every time we hit landfall, we're able to use Bristly Bill or Tireless Tracker to be able to add +1/+1 counters? What if we're able to tutor up combo lands or value lands? And this all kind of works itself together. We have, again, these cards are all playable, these cards are all good, but we have this another expression of White going towards landfall. Now, let's push it a little bit further. Let's say we have White of the Reliquary getting something like Lotus Field to be able to try to get a lot of mana generation, or Gaia's Cradle, because we're putting tokens out on the battlefield. with our Tor mod or whatever. And so we have ways to additionally find these lands. We're able to fill the graveyard, and we're able to use Ramunap Excavator. What if we were using a sacrifice team and we had Shadar to create tokens and we could pop every turn instead of Bloodghast, and we could return Forsaken Miner with Mayhem Devil, and we'd use Recurring Nightmare to get things back out of the graveyard. Do you see where I'm going with all of this? These cards can all exist together, and you can pull this card in different directions. Now this is going to look a little overwhelming, but let's kind of stretch this out and see what we're actually looking at. I realize I cannot move my camera, so these cards in the top right-hand corner, I will tell you about in just a second. So this may look like a shit show, but I didn't draw all the lines between everything, because then you wouldn't see the cards because there'd be so many lines everywhere. But let's take a second and show you what I'm trying to show you here with white. So we have this relationship with Bloodghast and Satoru, right? We talked about this already. You can look at Dryad Arbor as a way to tutor up a creature that also is a relationship to Satoru. We have all of the ways you can pull together, Yawgmoth combo. We can sacrifice Master of Death and bring it back, which triggers Insidious Roots and Tormod. We have Tyvar, which can give white haste. We have Bitter Blossom Jadar, this sort of like sacrifice part of it. We have token generate. We have plus one counter generation with Stalactite Stalker, Bristly Bill, Tireless Tracker. You can even, and so what I'm suggesting here is both that these cards are all interconnected with each other, and we're creating a network of synergy that also has a strong rate attached to it. And we can deck build, and we can give our players different elements of this. Now we could be down here, could be more in enchantments and recursion with enchantments. It could be up here with sacrifice. It could be down here with lands. It could be over here with like creature combo. These things can all exist together. They can exist in small relationships, like we can do, lands and counters, for instance. But when I see White of the Reliquary, this is how my mind explodes onto a page. I just see all of this potential, and not only do I look at all this and I see this network forming around White, I'm able to look at White and say, this could be a center of power for a cube. This could be a desirable card to both build around, but also be a part of a system that you can put together as a drafter. And the more centers of power that exist, and the more you can connect them together, well, you're giving your players an opportunity to build something in multiple different ways. So, White and Lurrus, these are both extremely, these are both can be centerpieces of a deck, or they can be part of an engine within a deck. And they can connect to each other and build a relationship together and be supported by other cards. Or it could be with Hogak. It could be with Yawgmoth. It could be with let's see. And where's another one? Like Field of the Dead, right? Satoru, the Infiltrator. You can find all of these different centers of power that people can look at and be inspired by and build towards, and not just look at it as a card with Bloodghast, or that they're going to add Bloodghast for this card, and then maybe sometimes this happens, maybe sometimes it doesn't. Maybe sometimes Bloodghast does one other thing. Be open-ended, be open-minded. Look for more things that can and do naturally exist and are extensions of a card and can connect to other powerful cards. Now, the cube exists outside of all of this as well. One of the reasons I put the Ozolith here, I know it's like tucked behind the Bristly Bill, but like there's a world where you look at white and you look at Bristly Bill and Stalactite Stalker, and that brings you towards the Ozolith. And you start moving in that direction. The Ozolith is now a power center in your cube, and you have the Shattered Spire, and you have like Arcbound Ravager, and all of a sudden you have artifacts that you can start to play with, and moving plus and plus encounters around. Maybe you have more of a lands theme, and you have Valakut and Prismatic Omen, and you can keep tutoring up these lands and like have this whole like land combo thing going on, and that leads you to places like Exploration. That leads you to Scapeshift. That leads you to like more of that. The more you look for these things, the more you will begin to evaluate cards with this perspective. And cards that seem like they don't offer this possibility space they'll probably look and feel a little less exciting. I was literally doing this and moving cards around. I started pointing arrows everywhere. And I was like, I can't fucking keep doing this. Like I could keep putting around on the periphery here. I can keep building outward. You might as well do this with your physical cube. So, now that I've showed you that, let's look at some other cards. And we don't have to necessarily go through this, right? But like I want to present these cards as questions for you. And the question is, as I said before, what can I do with this card? I want you to look at Gearson, Starn, Keller Morph, and I want you to ask yourself, what can I do with this card? Whenever no source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, it deals 2 damage to that permanent or player. What cards come to mind for you? Grape Shot, maybe? Tokens, like 1/1 tokens, maybe? Gut Shot, even? Do you see this as do you see potentials for incremental advantage? Yeah, Prodigal Sorcerer, yes. Captain Wacky, you're always coming in with the heat, man. Do you see this as do you see this just as a card that exists within this incremental value framework, or do you see this as having an explosive ceiling? Because both are possible. Well, yes, Zoe. I was trying to look at cards that were within the card's colors as opposed to outside with regards to white, because I didn't want to stray too far, and start showing cards like Seasoned Pyromancer that go well with White of the Reliquary, because all that stuff is obviously possible. We could keep going, but I decided to keep it within black and green for that. Crime Desert Duels, Fast One, Zern Orb Amulet, yeah. With Slogurk, right? So we don't have to go too far into this, but I want to just present these as things for you. Slogurk to Overslime. Obviously, everybody knows about this card now because of Standard and because of the Legends deck. But this card does so many things for 3 mana. And it is a 3 mana 3/3. Again, Gearson Starn is a 3 mana 3/2 with Ward 2. Slogurk is a 3 mana 3/3 with Trample. These cards are not bad creatures. They're not here purely as synergistic pieces. These are on-rate good cards. Slogurk can do all kinds of stuff. And you can start to map that out and look at the potential for that. Going away from gold cards, because there's obviously a conversation to be had about gold cards with, what is worth a gold slot. And just to touch on that briefly, as I know we're looking at single colored cards, but there's often a conversation in cube space about the value of a gold slot. And a lot of hay has been made over the last couple of years of increasing your lands, your mana fixing lands, so that you can support more gold cards. Because gold cards are, a lot of times they're more powerful. Terminate is a very powerful removal spell. Teferi Time Reveler is a powerful planeswalker, etc. And so I like to think of gold cards now as a chance for, like, as a reason to be in those colors, and a point, like a something that can inspire you to build towards it. I'd like to think of gold cards as centers of power, ideally. They're not all that way. Maybe we will get that in a couple of years. But, like, that you can carve a path towards this card and find it powerful and have and find a relationship with that card with other cards in the cube. So it's not signposting a singular thing. It's inspiring a bunch of things. And those things are present. So, anyway. Singular colored cards, okay? O'Hare Axonal. This is maybe cheating a little because it has, like, the Gearson Starn vibe to it too. Because, you deal 1 damage with Gearson on the battlefield. O'Hare makes it 4 immediately. So there's a relationship that exists there that I'm aware of. However, O'Hare Axonal does some pretty crazy stuff if you've never played with it before. Beyond just, like, Lava Dart, I'm talking, like, Mayhem Devil dealing 4 damage. There's, again, I want you to think about where this card could... What can you do with this? What can I do with O'Hare Axonal? Like, how can I make this card messed up? And it's a 4-mana 4/4 Trampler. What can I... Okay, Agatha Soul Cauldron. This is maybe cheating, like Slogger. Everybody probably knows by now that Agatha Soul Cauldron does everything. But I still don't see enough expression and maximalization of Agatha Soul Cauldron when I look at that in a list. Like, I still don't see enough Carrion Feeders and Cathar Commandos and stuff like that. Anything that activates and sacrifices and, things that could lead you somewhere really crazy. And Soul Cauldron is probably one of the most wonderful designs I've seen in last 2 years. So asking you to figure out what this card can do for you is maybe a little weird because that's literally what it does. But I don't know, maybe it was like an easy one to just be like, oh yes, this card does everything. Prof's Eidetic Memory. This was a card that I wasn't even on my radar. I thought it was cool in theory with, draw 7s, like wheels, because it's like, oh, I get to put 7 +1/+1 counters on something after I play my Profs. This is a similar expression of this effect in blue to, like, Duelist of the Mind, right? Like, you get paid off for drawing a ton of cards, which, I don't know, some people find that cool, some people find that, like, very Winmore. However, I think, like, having a ceiling on drawing extra cards, like having something, like, big happen when you cast Brainstorm gives Brainstorm additional utility. I remember earlier this year I drafted my cube and I first picked Brainstorm, and I was talking about it later because I ended up drafting a deck with a lot of miracles in it, and I was like, and like also like top of library, like manipulation, right? And I was like, man, what did you first pick? We go around the table. What did you first pick? I first picked Brainstorm. And I remember somebody was like, oh yeah, Brainstorm. Like, of course, it's a broken magic card or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but like, I gave it additional utility. I maximized my Brainstorm. So I had a reason to hold it. I had a reason to time it. I had a reason to get more use out of it. I got to be more creative with it. I got to express myself with my Brainstorm. And everybody knows Brainstorm's nuts. So there's still value to be had there. And eidetic memory does something with Brainstorm and with Wheels and with, I don't know, give me other cards. Where else does this card lead you? There's some examples I wanted to throw at you, so it wasn't just about white. Okay, winding down on this. So why adopt this method? Why do this? You know, if I haven't convinced you to take another look at this already. So I've mentioned something about power centers or centers of power before. So in the cube space, there's a concept people have called power outliers. This is generally a way of evaluating whether a card is either too good or nowhere near good enough for your cube, and that everything has to exist within this controlled band of power, right? This is like a very kind of established model of thinking about cube design. And I would argue that we could look at it differently. A center of power suggests that a card, you could call it a build around, and that's part of what makes a center of power, but that a card has a potential with a lot of pathways towards it. Or you could reverse that and say you have a lot of pathways from this card outward. So in the network scenario that I'm arguing for, this is crucial to understanding the vital nodes that define the cube that you're building, or the experience that you want people to have. It is a mental framework change. It is a way of looking at cards differently. That's literally the whole reason I'm doing this, right? So, centers of power. White of the Reliquary, I would argue, is a center of power. Lurrus of the Dream Den, I would argue, is a center of power. Etali, Primal Conqueror, I would argue, is a center of power. These are definitive threats and spells that create your experience. They don't, while they might not show up every draft, if you're doing like a 540 or something, if you do control your environment enough to draft the entire cube every time, you could build the cube in a way such that people can find different pathways to execute these spells or these creatures. And instead of worrying about whether or not a card is good or bad, worry instead about where the core of the power in the cube lies. So it's looking in towards the center. It's not looking out. You will, if you adopt this method, you will find that new cards will inspire changes, ideological radical ideological changes, versus merely interrogating whether cards can exist within an existing model. So I'm suggesting that you can allow yourself to be inspired by new cards and find new ways to engage with your cube and new cubes in general. There have been single cards that people have built entire cubes from. And that shit is awesome. And those are good stories. And I don't hear them often enough. Maybe I'm not talking to the right people. Who knows? I believe that if you think about this stuff the way I've presented it, you will find more inspiration. You will find yourself embracing new ideas. You will find yourself becoming a little more radical, maybe. Who knows? And this one is maybe this next one is a little more sizzly hot. Belief in archetypes will dissolve. What do I mean by that? Because that's weird, Derek. believing that there has to be a set of archetypes that are draftable and that are in dialogue with each other, that this is a way to communicate a cube's, overall cadence and rhythm and structure. That the system exists from this archetype model. This model is both signpost uncommons from limited formats. This model is also aggro, mid-range, control, and combo. Yes, I am suggesting that 10 two-color pairs that point in a direction and have support is a structure that is necessary for limited. It is not necessary for cube. However, it is not heresy to me if you do structure a cube this way. Aggro, mid-range, control, and combo is a bit of a more tricky thing to talk about. I would like to present the idea that these archetypes are a very old form of thinking about Magic, and they mostly are defined by speed, except for combo. There is a general structure to gameplay patterns that we could talk about with specifically aggro and control, but really we're talking about speed and when a game plan is at its maximum and what the matchup spread is supposed to look like. It's all very calculated, and I don't actually think that these things are helpful once you're trying to find a form of card evaluation that looks towards the things I've suggested in this stream. I would also like to present the argument that when you look at standard and you look at standard draft environments, the last couple of years, maybe up to 5 years, there's really decks are starting to look a lot more like what people would just call mid-range decks. Look at Esper. Look at Slogurk. Look at Temur Lands. These are all, in the traditional sense, mid-range decks. And if you don't know what they are, take a moment, look them up. If you're curious about the exact structure of them. However, they all have a very different speed to them and different priorities. And I would even go so far as to say that the Legends deck, the Slogurk deck in particular, is hard to define outside of calling it mid-range for the sake of the speed of the deck. But the game plan is pretty muddy. It can be very aggressive, it can be combo-oriented, it can be mid-rangey, and it can be controlling. Why do I bring this up? Because I believe that when you look at building a cube this way, you will find defining archetypes as a form of communication to be less of a priority than you would with finding card maximalization, building matrices out from cards, or building a network of interconnected relationships. It's a bit more abstract, but it relies upon a form of fluid thinking that is trying to push against the boundaries of what these archetypes are supposed to be, and allowing yourself to embrace the idea that they can coexist with each other. That fair and unfair are really two different expressions of the same thing. That we're all kind of playing similar speeds with different interconnected pieces. Cube is not bound to these traditional archetype models. And the more that you might buy into this, the stronger you might agree with me. And you don't have to. But I'd like to propose that as a suggestion to you. Let's get some final thoughts in, because I've been talking for a while. Seek the ideal with each card in your cube. Ideally, we can look at every single card this way, from lands to colorless to gold, all the way through. This does not mean that it has to happen, but there is an attitude to like aspire to. You can ideally trace a line from one end of the cube to the other. I've said this multiple times already. Look at cards together, find their relationships. This is not about archetype design. This is not about White of the Reliquary being a graveyard sacrifice lands archetype. This is about investigating how we can build towards unexpected and unique game states. Yes, this method of card evaluation is embracing the idea that we can have novel experiences, unique game states of cards that are interacting unexpectedly with each other. Or perhaps just as a complex series of engines or relationships. This approach can test your drafters' ability to be more creative deck builders and find more unique lines, to find victory with different cards, or to find victory to familiar cards in weird ways. Okay? There is a prevailing notion about Cube that you are kind of buying into the designer's vision or pushing up against the designer's vision. But there's not as much room for self-expression in how you want to play the game or approach the game as there is in Commander. Commander is a just overflowing well of self-expression as a format. And Cube can be more of that for you and your drafters. And I believe that looking at things this way can lead you to a place where you're giving your players more of an ability to express who they are and what they want out of the game. It is our responsibility as designers, as creators, as people sharing our time with other people to play a game, that we should be engendering this stickiness of our games to our players, and we should offer this desire for replayability. It is not enough, in my estimation, that we have friends. Yes, that sounds crazy, but the gathering is very important. We need our friends, we need our playgroups, we need to have those bonds with other people. We are social creatures, etc., etc. But you can give people a game that they want to play again. We shouldn't have to just use Magic as an excuse to see each other. We can see each other and use Magic to express ourselves with each other and share moments with each other and find relationships with each other through this game and with this game. And that's where this is all headed to. And I think as I do this more, I have a couple more things in mind that I want to go over with you. This is where this comes from for me. This is a pretty big sticking point. Yeah. Anyway, that was all I had for the slides. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you. I hope I sold some of this to you. I guess any questions? If anybody has anything, it's not necessary to ask a question, but if you have anything you want to state or suggest, I'm happy to engage. I think I wrote in my thing that I love to engage in my audience. So now's the time. Just some clapping. Okay. All right. Well, let's guess let's end it there. With my recording at least. Oh, I wasn't recording. Well, I'll just use the VOD. That's fine. I thought I was recording for OBS, but it's okay. Twitch VODs, baby. Okay. So what do I have? What else do I have here? I guess I could just finish this by saying that Mike's. Do you feel like answers hate fit into these networks in a fundamentally different way? When you say answers, what do you mean, Zoe? Hate, I have an answer for, but I'm curious what you mean by answers, because you're talking about interaction. I think that there's a lot of room for interaction. I think that interaction is like one of the most fundamental parts of Magic, and what makes Magic fun is playing a game against another human being. Go back to my fun little. Yeah. Can I go back? How do I go back? There we go. Let's go back to it. This is a fun little thing here. So I'll start by hate if you want to talk about answers. Hate is, I'm assuming you're talking about like Blood Moon or like Veil of Summer, like cards like that are like Rest in Peace, cards like that. Because hate is like I think about sideboard hate initially. There's a difference between Rest in Peace, which has is very binary in in its execution. It doesn't really do anything besides be a permanent and be an enchantment on the battlefield. And it shuts down decks that are trying to utilize the graveyard. It doesn't. Its relationship to the cards in the cube is extremely binary. That doesn't really fit the model that I'm looking for. I also find hate pieces like that to be just unnecessary when I'm trying to like create a space for people to like interact. Things that remove interaction are challenging for me to accept. I think that when there's good gameplay, I like to define that as like people are able to interact with each other, and that the game does not end when something happens. Now, obviously, that I can point to exceptions to that rule, like Tendrils of Agony, for instance, or Grape Shot or whatever. But there's a difference between getting to combo off with a Storm Kill and getting to play like. I want white to be center of power. What cards are really satisfying to play against it? I mean, removal, right? Like, if we're talking about interaction that's not synergistic, yeah, I mean, one of the... Okay, so, yeah, so you do mean interaction. So, when you're playing with cards like Lyris of the Dream Den and Hogak and Field of the Dead and Entomb and White of the Reliquary, cards that are like able to create engines or create overwhelming board presence or value, I think you are incentivized in this instance specifically to play with very powerful interaction. I think letting your opponent answer what you're doing is healthy. And I think like I'd like to see a healthy amount of strong, versatile interaction, especially at cheap mana values. Because if everything can be part of this complex system and everything can be networked together and there's a relationship that happens where we can build engines and like this is the fundamental gameplay pattern that I'm suggesting, then you better be able to break stuff up because there's going to be like powerful stuff that has to get dealt with. And I think like being able to exchange resources and answer each other's stuff and the game continuing on, so like your eggs aren't all in the same basket, but like we're able to meaningfully interact and like progress the game state in like a good clip is like fucking ideal gameplay. Like it doesn't all have to look like we're playing Jund mirrors, because I've heard that suggested about like high interaction cubes or whatever. That's a great point where if everything contributes, you need to be able to interact. Yeah. And like you need to be able to interact and you need the interaction to be good, because like you need like exile removal, you need cheap removal. And so like cards like Disfigure look worse when you're trying to do stuff like this. You just kind of need like broken removal. Like you need like unconditional stuff. Because you don't want to draw something. You don't want to draw Eliminate in the moment where you're trying to stifle somebody playing with a 4-mana creature or whatever, an O'Hare Axonal or whatever. So there's some tension there, and it does kind of like push me towards playing really strong removal only. But it also means I play more Graveyard Hate, and I play more like Relic of Progenitus and Soulguide Lantern and Lion Sash and Scavenging Ooze and stuff like that. And a lot of artifact and enchantment removal. There just needs to be play and counterplay. So, it's not all just engine creation and snowballing. Because if it did, we wouldn't be playing a game. We wouldn't be interacting with each other. And what I want ultimately for us to do is interact with each other as well. So I hope that answers your question. So interaction feels better. Hate is a word that implies that something is like shutting down somebody without being, and it's very hard to interact with, or is like just like a stone cold block. One of the things that I'll bring up is Relic of Progenitus against all these graveyard shit. It has to exist because so much happens in the graveyard, but it is also a permanent that can be interacted with. And by playing creatures that are good on rate, you're able to combat a relic because you're able to just play creatures and attack with them. So like when I go back to rate being a balancing knob to help with gameplay, that's part of what I'm talking about. Rate really matters, and there's an over-reliance on it, and that's okay. I think like the base gameplay of Magic is still fun. I happen to just be in a place lately where I want to do a lot. I want to be able to give more possibilities to people. This is a result of, again, like I said in the beginning, over a year of talking to multiple different people. Macroneer is one of them. Dave McDarby is one of them. There are probably countless others. Those are two that really stand out to me, though. I have really good relationships with both of these guys. They both inspired me greatly. They both led me to embrace these different ways of looking at these cards, because I find the base game to be wholly embraced by much of the cube space, and not something I need to be replicating at this time. I find it just very, very sufficiently expressed, in my opinion. There's more that's possible while holding on to something, while staying grounded. So, anything else? Any other questions? I'd love to answer a few more before I sign off. If not, that's cool too. All right. Well, I guess I'm going to be doing, like I said before, I will be doing this a couple more times with a couple different points that I'd like to stress with the community. I find content like this to be lacking, and I think that it's a good talking point, and that this is the best medium for me to be communicating. So, okay, Zoe, have a good one, and stream